Hello everyone. I am here with the tutorial I promised for your final case study. In the tutorial, I want to be as detailed as possible and I will include everything you need to do for each of the parts. So I don't know how long this video will be, but anyway, we'll start with your case study instructions on Canvas. So here you have the case, basically a short description. I added this here because I noticed there was a little bit of panic with the data corrections. For the final project, you don't have to do that. That's why you have this sentence here saying that you were unable to leave the temperature probe at the scene. So that means you don't have those temperatures, which means you just have to do the time of colonization estimate with the temperatures you find from NOAA. So that's that. For the case, you got insect evidence, a case report from the detectives, and some photos, which we're going to look at in a moment. And then during the investigation, you measured the insect specimens and took additional photos, which we also have at the bottom here. But yeah, you just have to identify your specimens and determine the time of colonization or how long the animal was there. For the instructions, you need to do a final case report. For this, I want a single PDF document. It can have as many pages as you need, but just make sure you're submitting a single PDF document. The final case report needs to be in the ABFE format, which will be discussed in Module 14, so starting tomorrow, Monday, but I will explain it in this video at the end. You also need to include the spreadsheets you use. I'll show you an example of how to do that. So basically a screenshot of the Excel spreadsheet with your analysis. That should be fine. Just make sure everything is visible. And then here it says to include the PDF versions of any references you use. If you already did this and you have the PDF versions in there, that's fine. But if you haven't done this, I am okay with just the references. So just make sure you include the references in the reference list and you don't have to include the PDF version. If you already did, that's okay. But if you haven't, you can just include the link, the references. Here, very important, you have a couple of incidental arthropods. You don't have to identify them to species level. I only want them identified to the order. So, and we'll look at the photos now. But yeah, don't waste your time trying to identify the species level of the incidental arthropods. Here you have the measurements of the maggots you collected or that you received and you measured them. This goes in your case report and I'll show you where exactly. And then this paragraph right here has some information that you also need to include in your final case report. Here in this link, you have your final case incident report and you have the animal control center and then the report information. So these animal control center called the Harris County Law Enforcement, and then the Harris County Law Enforcement contacted you. So when we talk about contact information for the case report, it is these contact information. You can put the number of the responding officer and then the agency right here. The case number is right here. Dates, time, address, everything you need for the case report is here. You also have a summary. This is what they gave you. So what they saw at the scene, what they collected, any photos they took. So all of this information you need to include in your case report in the case summary section. Okay, so that's your incident report. If you keep scrolling, you're gonna find the photos. So you have photos of the body, and you can use these to describe it on the case summary. You also have photos of the landscape where the body was found. You have images of the maggot spiracles, which you need to use to identify the instar. And then you have some photos of the adults you reared, which you need to use to identify the adults. And you have one last image of the maggot. And at the end, you have 3 photos of those unknown insects that you have to identify to the order. And then, as always, I recommend you look at the rubric so you know what you have to include to have all of the points for each of the sections. We have a section of the case information summary. So you have to include all of the information, the contact information, basically all of the parts that need to be in the report. The insect evidence, you need to include the description, the collection and method, the instar, the identification of the specimens, and the references you used. Analysis of evidence, you need to include a short description of the environmental conditions, include your spreadsheets with your analysis, all of your calculations and the analysis you used. And then your conclusion section, which is a summary of your case. So you're going to explain the case from your perspective, and there you're going to include the time of colonization estimate. You have points for the references. You need at least 3 primary references in the ESA format. So remember, I left comments on the assignment number 2 regarding the references and the formatting. Just make sure you're following the ESA format. And then you have points for the format. So just make sure you have all of the sections required by the ABFE. And then 10 points for grammar. So that should be fairly easy. Okay, so we already went through the incident report and the photos. So the next thing I suggest you do is identify your specimens. So like I said, for the incidentals, you only need to identify to the order. And for that, I've included a revised version of your arthropod key. So if you go to the home page on the resources, and scroll down to the identification keys, I made this new section for the final case study. So for the incidentals, you should use, or you can use this key right here. And that's the one we saw on a previous module. So that's the one I recommend you use. You can do whatever you like. Just make sure you include the reference of the key you used. And then for the adults, I recommend you use this one, the Blowflies of North America key, which is this one. And I'm gonna go back to the assignment. Okay, so we're back on the assignment. Let's go to the photo of our fly. Okay, so this key right here is an interactive key. You have to scroll to the bottom. And then it has a lot of terminology and morphology, but you can start on slide 18. And then you basically have to look at the photos you have here and follow along the key. So I'll do the first one and then you'll do the rest of it by yourself. But for example, we're looking at the stem vein. So whether it has hairs like this one or not. So you have a wing with the hairs. So that means you go with this route. And for this key, you have to make sure the hand is showing, not just the pointer. And then when you click, it will take you to the next couplet. So you can just continue using this key if you like, or you can just use whatever key you find for adult flies. But yeah, you can zoom in on this photo to see this next part and so on. So that would be for your specimen identification part. For the maggot identification, you only need to use the maggot photos to identify the instar. And then since you reared the maggots to adult, whatever species you identify your adult as, that would be the species of your maggots. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the temperature section.